Darrick Moe is the CEO of the Minnesota Rural Electric Association. Darrick started his service as president and CEO of the Minnesota Rural Electric Association, MREA, in 2014. As Minnesota's statewide association, MREA serves all 50 of the state's rural electric cooperatives, providing safety, support, education, and training, as well as political and policy leadership. Welcome, Darrick. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim started his remarks by commenting, and ended them actually too, with that it would be great to be here in person. I got to say, being here in person, I feel this may be the first time this ever happened. I feel a little regret for not being here in Zoom, because their screens are so big and beautiful here. Jim's head was at least twice as big as I'm a regular size human, okay? In fact, I'm actually quite tall. I'm just far away. So it's despite the size discrepancy, it's a great pleasure to be here in person. And actually, following up right where Jim left off to a large degree is a great transition to my remarks, because I have some similar kinds of concepts to share. The Minnesota Rural Electric Association, kind of like Jim's group, is a national organization for rural electric co-ops. The Minnesota Rural Electric Association is the statewide organization for the 50 rural electric co-ops in the state of Minnesota. So collectively, the co-ops serve 85% of the landmass of the state and about a third of the population of the state. And we do a lot of things on behalf of our members, including working on energy policy. And so kind of these kinds of questions that Jim ended with, and their impacts on energy policy, particularly at the state level, Jim's focus was more national, will be the focus of my remarks. I graduated from the electrical engineering program at the University of Minnesota. I'll just say some time ago back. And I studied how the electric grid functions and have spent a career in the field since trying to understand that mysterious topic. And I will say we do stand at a critical crossroads. The North American electric grid, characterized as the most complex machine, and as Dan mentioned already this morning, identified by the National Academy of Science and Engineering as the most important innovation in the 20th century. But it kind of reminds me of a commercial that appeared a couple of years ago during the Super Bowl with Larry David. Anybody, Larry David? That ring a bell to anyone in the audience? Probably, maybe not, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. Larry David was creator of Seinfeld. He was kind of the lead role in Curb Your Enthusiasm. He played a great, grumpy old guy that really wasn't impressed by very much. So that's kind of the Larry David persona. And they had him in the commercial with the Super Bowl. They would bring him the most fantastic inventions through time to see how Larry would react to them. So it begins with bringing him the wheel. They say, Larry, this is during the Stone Age. They roll it out and say, Larry, we bring you the wheel. And he says, So, I feel like Larry's reaction of it is akin to the importance of the power grid today. It's the great invention of our modern time that will serve us even better in the next century, as we decarbonize the power grid and move our energy needs even more predominantly to this electric power grid. As somebody that has worked my whole career in this area, I look forward to it filling an even larger role then in the lives of my grandchildren. That is, if we can avoid breaking it. Our society is totally dependent on ample, affordable electricity being ever present, wherever and whenever we need it. And we have spent 130 years piecing together electrical components across the country and getting them to operate in one integrated and complex machine. And yet I feel some policymakers are the Larry Davids of the power grid. You bring them instant, safe, affordable access to electricity, no stinky smells, any place, anytime, flip a switch and summon the power of electricity from nearby and from thousands of miles away to serve your every need. Candles are nice. An important thing to understand about the power system is that at every moment, it must be in exact balance. It's more complicated than the wheel. The amount of electricity you draw from the grid collectively, as a neighborhood, as Lake Region, as the state of Minnesota, as the entire country, must exactly match the amount of electricity being drawn from that grid at the same moment in time. If it does not, the system collapses and everything goes dark. There was a reference to turning lights off, to controlled power interruptions. That's what's required to make sure that that collapse doesn't happen. And electricity moves at precisely the speed of light, faster than my grandchildren to their iPads. Unlike the water delivery system, you can't position electricity strategically around the country in holding tanks and dispatch it over minutes or hours as people need it. That doesn't work at all. When new load is called for, as you flip switches and industries turn on motors and new data centers light up, the electricity needed must immediately respond and be placed on the grid at the same time to keep the whole thing operating. Now, what does this have to do with energy policy? The entities responsible for keeping the power grid functioning, like the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, or MISO, and the North American Electric Reliability Grid, are warning that the balanced portfolio of generation resources that we have built over the last 130 years is changing too rapidly to ensure that it will hold together reliably under all conditions moving forward. The last couple of decades have seen a rapid growth in wind and solar, which is a good thing. These resources have been effectively integrated to date and provide an affordable source of electricity in many conditions. And we will see the continued growth of wind and solar resources. But we must also have other sources of electricity that we control, available at night when the wind isn't blowing, and energy policy is currently making it more difficult to build these resources and is pushing existing generators down and offline sooner than previously planned. Those overseeing reliability are now warning that there are hours of the year when electricity consumption is the heaviest that we may not have enough generation to serve it at all. And if that happens, power companies will either need to intentionally shut off some people's power or risk the entire network collapsing. Because if you don't keep electricity use and supply in constant balance in real time, that's what happens. Now, to be clear, I'm not talking about Lake Region. I'm not talking about Great River Energy in particular. I'm not talking about any particular day, tomorrow, and so on. I'm talking about the industry as a whole and Minnesota as a state as we continue to march forward during this rapid transition into the future. In Minnesota, specifically, the legislature recently passed, as has been mentioned, a law requiring all electricity use be carbon-free by 2040. That is the state law, and cooperatives are included in that law and required to comply just like any other utility in the state. And the grid was already rapidly transitioning to carbon-free resources before that law, and cooperatives have been rapidly building wind and solar generation. At Lake Region, as was mentioned earlier, and there was a nice picture, big picture on the screen there, you have an innovative hybrid project that includes both wind and solar at the same site. And cooperatives have aggressive plans to continue to build these kinds of resources, both locally and across the country. And that's a good thing. Wind and solar resources make an effective part of the mix. But there is real-life risks that policy pressures force power grid into unsustainable situation. You can look at the generation mix at any particular moment. Anyone can. MISO provides the information in real time. Again, MISO is tasked with controlling the grid in real time and ensuring that any time that you flip a switch, there'll be sufficient generation online to immediately respond. You can go to their website, download their app, take a look as you go through your day, week, or months, and monitor where the power is coming from. In some hours, wind is over 50% of the total. But there are many hours in which the combination of wind and solar is only a few percentage points. There are many hours of any month where coal, natural gas, and nuclear energy are 70 or 80% of what's filling our needs at this point. Not because wind and solar are available but turned off. These resources are used first when they are available, when it's sunny or windy. In those hours when it's supplying only a tiny portion of our needs, it is because the sun isn't shining bright enough or the wind isn't blowing. Those resources are simply unavoidable, unavailable. The notion that you can build a power grid with only wind and solar, supplemented by a little battery storage, is dangerous. Storage will have a growing and important role. I want to talk a moment about that. Storage helps fix the challenge of producing and using electricity simultaneously. But it is not possible to build enough storage with today's available technology to move the grid to a wind and solar and storage only scenario. To give you an idea of what I'm talking about, consider the battery that Tesla sells to install in your garage. If you look at posted prices for this battery system and calculate how much it would cost to install enough batteries to last 3 days, we're going to do wind, solar, and 3 days worth of battery storage. It would cost $400 trillion. That is, to install enough batteries to cover 3 days of the planet's energy use, we will need to invest 4.5 times of the gross domestic product of the globe. Now, fortunately, the batteries have a 10-year warranty. But that cost doesn't include generating any energy. Because remember, batteries only store power. They don't actually generate power. Batteries are great, and innovation in this area is important. But we do not currently have a technology solution that allows batteries to serve with wind and solar to reliably provide for our total energy needs. So, what I hear most often after this is, we'll innovate. Wind, solar, and innovation, it's all you need, baby. Sounds like a bar and lounge special to me. Carbon-free by 2040 is 15 years from now. Hoping for innovation, referencing innovation with a tone implying authority and optimism, is more like Gnosticism than real faith. It's a claim to some hidden knowledge that will save us all. But underpinning this claim is plain fantasy in today's industry. We'll find a unicorn. We'll search for Sasquatch. We'll consult the creature from Loch Ness. When I hear my fellow travelers say, we'll solve these challenges by innovating, I want to shake them from the grip of some siren call and return them to their faculties so that we can work together on actually solving the problems in front of us with the tools we have available. When I hear wind, solar, and innovation, we'll solve these challenges by innovating, it strikes me as a two-part claim. One, humans can do miracles. And two, my goal of living my life ought to be to do so without leaving a trace on the globe, because that's what I'm called to do if I love the planet. But this is squarely at odds with two things that I hold dear. One, I love my fellow human beings, and that's what I'm called to focus on. And two, my goal is loving people. God performs the miracles. My goal is to love people, and I must treat the planet as our home and our only home for human flourishing. And remember that an adequate energy supply is critical to your neighbors. The neighbors that have a sustainable energy supply today, as well as the nearly 1 billion people on the globe who have never been able to live in such a luxury. So we have been innovating for 130 years and developed an electrical power grid that I am grateful for. And I hope will contribute as much as the wheel. Perhaps it doesn't, but hopefully it will contribute more. And we should not recklessly throw stakes in the wheels as if they were spikes for this power grid as we seek some new shiny object that we have not yet seen and label that innovation. The reality is we must keep enough controllable generation online to balance renewable energy in a reliable way. We need to slow down the shutdown of fossil fuel. And I tell you all of that to say this: we need policymakers in Minnesota to allow us to unleash the future potential of nuclear energy. Now, Jim just pointed out some of the near-term challenges with nuclear energy, and clearly Jim and I did not, synchronize our comments here completely, but he's focused on near-term challenges and making the basic point that nuclear isn't going to replace gas in the near term, and I'll just say I completely agree with that assessment as well. However, in this state, we have a nuclear moratorium that prevents nuclear from being a tool we can use into the future, and that's a problem. That's a problem that faces policymakers in the rest of Minnesota, and I want to unpack that challenge and make a few comments around that issue. In 1994, the Minnesota legislature imposed a moratorium on building new nuclear generation. Nuclear does not depend on the weather or the time of day, and it is reliably available at all times, and it is a carbon-free resource. So with a new law requiring that all generation be carbon-free, it is inappropriate to continue this moratorium. Nuclear power currently provides about half of all of the state's carbon-free electricity on an annual basis. But even if those two generators operating today live forever, which they clearly cannot, that 50% will diminish over time as electricity consumption grows, as AI increases our electricity use, and as the economy is electrified for our benefit. Nuclear energy is by far the safest source of electricity in existence, considering the entire fuel cycle and all impacts on humanity. It has bipartisan support across the country. Both the Biden and the Trump administration have been clear about the need for nuclear energy to power our future. The spent fuel has been dealt with safely. All the spent fuel in the industry that has ever been created by the industry nationwide could fit within one football stadium, and no human has ever been harmed by storing spent fuel. Zero. Nuclear power also uses less land than any alternative, less land by far. Lifting the state's inappropriate moratorium on nuclear power is a major legislative priority for cooperatives. Cooperatives are leading a coalition of 37 organizations formed solely for accomplishing this task, the Minnesota Nuclear Energy Alliance. And it includes labor unions, recognizing that nuclear energy resources would bring excellent jobs to their communities. It includes environmental groups, understanding that to achieve carbon-free electricity, you must have generators available at all times of the day that are carbon-free. And it includes the state's utilities, trying to keep the lights on as we transition to this carbon-free environment. If you're part of an organization that would like to join this coalition, I certainly encourage you to reach out to us as we work on this issue. One of the important developments in the nuclear energy industry is a wide range of research and development that is being done. And again, these are about the longer-term solutions. I think Zach will provide some additional feedback on this. But instead of only having the option of big traditional nuclear plants, like the one Jim referenced with 2 units coming online in the last couple of years, the industry is also working to develop small modular reactors, or even microreactors. SMRs is what these small modular reactors are called. They can be built for significantly less money, and because by standardizing them and shrinking the design, they could be largely constructed off-site and delivered to a site instead of uniquely developed in every location. These designs are relatively new, but they are now being deployed internationally already as we speak, and similar concepts have been deployed on naval vessels actually for decades. Your own Mike Basil here at Lake Region as a board member works in the industry and is focused on these new designs in his career. The Tennessee Valley Authority has recently applied to the Nuclear Energy Regulatory Commission to site its first SMR in the U.S. Well, again, gas, that doesn't mean it's cheaper than gas, as Jim pointed out. U.S. tech companies are pursuing nuclear energy. Google recently signing an agreement to purchase power from SMRs as one of many examples. Ontario Power Generation is in the process of deploying 4 SMRs. So if you feel the nuclear power as an industry is not a going concern in recent history, that's actually true in Minnesota. But we are in the process of being left behind. Lifting the moratorium would not mean we are on the road to building any particular plant. Building a plant still involves all the required permitting and public review. It would mean demonstrating that that plant is the most affordable alternative available for consumers. So once the moratorium is lifted, building a plant would still take many years. However, what lifting the moratorium would do is remove one "thou shalt not" currently in place due only to policy. It would release Minnesota's utilities and our universities and our labor unions, release them from the bondage of a moratorium, and allow them to consider these vitally important carbon-free resources. Allow Minnesota to participate in the nuclear renaissance that's currently started across the country and the rest of the world. One other important policy priority I'd like to highlight aside from nuclear: reforming the state's outdated and inequitable net metering laws. As I mentioned, we have seen and will see a lot of solar energy. In fact, nationally, solar accounted for 84% of all generation installed in 2024. However, it should not be the responsibility for those that don't install solar systems at their homes to pay for their neighbors' solar panels through their electricity rates. And that is what is going on under the state's current net metering laws. This law was passed in 1984 to provide another way to incentivize the solar industry that was getting off the ground at that time. But with solar being 84% of all generation installed in 2024, it's now time for reform. These laws require that we pay those with solar panels full retail electricity rate for the generation that they produce, when we can purchase that same generation for much less elsewhere. For example, we can purchase energy from larger solar installations that would provide twice as much electricity for the same cost, due to the economies of scale involved in installing larger systems. The same carbon reduction at half the cost. And over 60% of your electricity bill goes to cover costs other than the energy itself, costs such as putting up all those power lines to get electricity to your home. So those that install big solar arrays at their home and make use of those power lines for free are shifting the cost of paying for those lines to other member owners. There is simply nowhere else for the required dollars to operate, build, construct the system to come from. Our reform would not change anything for solar systems installed to serve your own load or business. Member owners would continue to install properly sized systems to net out their own use and receive full retail rate compensation for those systems. But if you install a system that is larger than you need, if you install a system so big that its purpose is to sell electricity to the cooperative, you'd receive the same compensation for that electricity as the cooperative would pay someone else for that generation. California has had to adopt this kind of adjustment on how people are paid for their solar systems, because studies show that the average Californian is now paying over $300 every year of additional amount on their electricity bill due to this cost shift to subsidize those installing solar at their homes. And those installing solar are typically much better off financially than those that do not. So this wealth transfer, the result of putting additional costs on everybody's electricity bill to pay for a few people that have oversized systems, needs to be corrected. California has taken steps to do so. Minnesota is currently the only state in the union mandating that cooperatives pay full retail rate for excess generation. It is time Minnesota corrects this injustice. We had bipartisan support for this proposal in the Senate, which we greatly appreciate, but the effort was blocked in the House, and we will continue our work on the issue. Those are the key priorities for public policy, things I think need to be addressed to benefit Lake Region's members and the cooperatives across the state. Within the last couple of years, the North American Electric Reliability Council, which sets the standards for keeping the grid operating reliably, took the surprising step of including policy as one of the top 5 threats to reliability of the electric grid. So this is important work. We stand at a critical crossroad. Will legislators pass energy policy allowing Minnesota to participate in the nuclear renaissance and ensure the grid remains healthy while it picks up a bigger share of our economy? Cooperatives are quickly decarbonizing the power grid and working to keep electricity always available and affordable in the process. So we look forward to working together to ensure that it remains healthy and ready to use and take on a bigger share of our economy. Let's work together to make sure the reaction isn't a simple, Thank you.